Okay. Once you have your bowl or your cup or whatever it is that you're throwing centered, you want to secure it to the wheel so that it doesn't move while you're trimming it. Okay. So I'm going to grab a few little blobs of clay. Okay, and I recommend using the same clay that you started with so you don't leave stains on there. Okay. But I got just another blob of clay. I'm going to rip off 3 little chunks. Okay, and I'm going to squish those into what I call a hot dog. That's a very oddly shaped hot dog. I realize that. Probably not one you would want to eat. Looks a little more like something else. But besides the fact, I'm going to hold down on my bowl right here. Push a little pressure down right here. I'm going to set my, quote, hot dog down right there where it meets the wheel and the bowl at the same time. And I'm going to press that into this corner so it's touching the wheel and the project at the same time. Okay, so set it there and then squish, 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 squish. I'm going to turn it. Push down, not super hard, like you don't want to put a hole through your bowl, but hold it in place. Squish, 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 squish. Okay, last one. Squish, 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 squish. Okay, now there's a test that we do right here. This is called the twist test. So I'm going to grab a hold of my bowl, not the wheel. Grab a hold of your bowl, and I'm going to twist it. And if the wheel moves, I know my bowl is secure. If your bowl moves and the wheel stays still, you need to squish that down just a little tighter. Okay? Before we do any of this, though, something I forgot to mention. Your clay needs to be leather hard to trim. Maybe just barely before leather hard would still be okay. But if it is brand new, soft, fresh off the wheel, that's not going to happen. You're going to take a huge chunk out of it and be sad. On the contrary, if you were to trim something that is already greenware, you're just going to create this cloud of silica dust, which is not good for you or anybody else in the studio. So, not even if you add water to it, that'll just create a mess. So make sure, leather hard, or just barely before leather hard, before you start trimming. Okay. First step, I'm going to take my pear tool. I call this a pear tool. Some folks call it a bird head tool. Really, it's just another loop tool, but I call it a pear tool because it looks like a pear. I'm going to turn my wheel on medium speed. I'm going to keep one hand up here just in case. If something were to catch and go flying, I would want to make sure I have at least one way to hold on to it before I lose my whole project, okay? I'm going to make sure that it's still in the center before I officially apply pressure, which it still is. If it's not, we got to recenter it without your clay gloves, okay? But my first step, I always trim right here first. It's kind of personal preference. I just like to establish the difference between where the bowl is and where the foot should start. Now I have this foot ring, so I know where that's going to start. But it's just, you know, a habit. This is almost always where I start my trims. Okay, and I loosen up my pressure as I get closer down to the rim of the bowl. Okay, because I know, just from throwing this, that my walls are just a little thicker down here than they are up here. Nobody is perfect. Well, okay, there's a few people who are perfect at throwing, but I am not one of them. I know that I throw my bases just a little thick, but that's okay because I know I'm going to trim them to make them nice and even. Okay, now my pressure here, you can see that I'm holding onto the tool like this with my thumb and my middle finger and kind of into my palm, but I'm using my index finger to pressure into my piece hard enough to where you can see that band of clay, that nice ribbon of clay come off. Okay, now if this were too dry, that's going to start squealing. It's going to make this really awful noise that sounds like nails on a chalkboard. So keep that in mind. And then the next thing is that it's in pressure. Goodness gracious. It's important how much pressure you're applying. If you're doing too much, you could shave off way too much of your clay at once. If you're doing too little, with a dull tool and a fast wheel, it's going to do something called chattering, which is where the tool kind of vibrates on the side and it creates what some people really enjoy as a texture. But I don't want that right now for this bowl. So make sure you apply consistent pressure, and don't have your wheel going too fast. Okay, and I slowly kind of rotate the tool in my hand so it conforms to the size and the shape of the bowl. Okay, I'm going to stop it for a second to show you. There are some some trimming marks here now. Okay, you can kind of see those lines, and I don't really want those. That's not another texture that I want. Really up to you. In all cases, this is up to you how you want this thing to look, but I want it to be smooth. So I'm going to take my metal rib, I'm going to curve it just a little bit with my thumb like this, and I'm going to press that also into the wall. Okay, and that just caught on my little side nub here, my clay that's holding stuff into place. Okay, and put pressure into those throwing lines. So I don't want that. Okay, so just smoothing those out, and then I can go back with my red rib and do kind of the same thing. You just got to be careful of your clay down at the base that's holding you in place. There we go, nice and smooth again. I'm gonna go back with this. Now, what I'm watching here is the top. If this was off center, okay, this bottom might be kind of wonky. So you want to make sure that your bowl rim is flat. If I were to flip this over and look at it, is that a level surface or is one edge higher than the other? Which is evidence that it was thrown off center. If one edge is higher than the other on the rim, we want to cut that so that it's nice and flat, so that it sits flat when you turn it upside down to trim it. And that way your foot actually has a chance. But you can also, oh, almost heard that. Oh, never mind. It almost started to squeal on me. Because this is just a hair past leather hard. I waited just a little too long. Okay? But what I'm doing here is just flattening it out, making sure there's not any weird bumps, because that could throw me off when I go in to put in my foot. Okay? I'm going to switch tools back to my loop tool. Okay? And I'm going to round this edge, this little foot I made out. Kind of a decorative foot here. Some pressure in, almost the same thing. Support with my left hand so it doesn't go flying. Hold onto the tool with my thumb and middle finger and put pressure in with my index finger right on the neck there. And I slowly rotate the tool with my thumb and my middle finger. Okay, I'm kind of twisting the tool like this, so that I can get all the way around that nice curved edge, okay? So part of the beauty of throwing is creating something that you like, but also part of the beauty of trimming is trimming to your standards. There are certain things that I would look for on here that other people may not care about, okay? So like where the transition between this rounded edge and the bowl is, I like to have a sharp line. So I'm going to use this same tool just to make sure that sharp line is there. And that line has benefits rather than just looks. That also helps catch glaze in the kiln so that it doesn't drip onto your kiln shelf. And I created this little decorative foot using this, nope, not that one. This right here from Dirty Girls. I believe this rib, I think this one's called the Foot Fetish, which is kind of funny, but it's this edge here. And when I'm doing my undercut before I trim something off, I push this into the base and it makes this nice round decorative foot. And to see a finished example of that, you can go to Mr. Teapots on Instagram and find my soup and side bowls. That's what this is going to be. Next step, I'm going to draw a line up here using my needle tool. Okay, just drew a line just by pressing into it, and what I'm doing is establishing where my foot is going to start from the center here. So draw yourself a line, which makes a nice ring circle on the bottom. That's also a great indicator that it's still centered, because it's even thickness all the way around. Okay, and then I'm gonna go back in with my loop tool. I'm gonna use the corner here, and I'm gonna press into that line I just made to lower that down. Okay, just to kind of widen, it almost widens the line that we started with there. And what that does is that gives you a barrier so that when we start trimming from the center, you don't go past that and ruin your foot. So it's kind of like a safety wall, if you will. Okay, next step. This is where it gets a little more tricky. What I'm going to do is press into the center and move in a straight line to my right. And the reason I go to the right is because my wheel is spinning counterclockwise. If your wheel is spinning clockwise, you would want to go the other way, but counterclockwise. You want to start in the center with this corner. Don't go past because you can catch it. Okay, I'm going to press down and slowly drag to the right, all the way over to that barrier wall that we made. Okay, sweep off all the funk, get that out of your way. Now I'm going to do it again. Now where some folks go wrong here is that they'll put pressure in and they go way too fast over to the right. And all that does is create a swirly. We don't want a swirly. We want this to be nice and smooth. So slow down, hold on tight to your tool so that when you press, you can slowly drag over to our safety wall there. Okay, and we're making progress. It's important to know how thick your base is, especially when you're throwing it. So if you can remember, try to use your needle tool when you've opened your piece on the wheel for the first time. Stick your needle tool in there and then slide your finger down the needle, kind of like this. And then when you pull the needle out, you would see how thick your base is. You want to aim for about 1/4 of an inch thick. And I go over this in my how to throw a bowl demo. So check that out. But the whole point is knowing how thick your base is. That way you don't cut a hole through the bottom when you're doing this step. Okay, so know how thick your base is and know how much clay you can officially take off before it goes through the middle. Here's a trick, and you're going to have to take my word for it because I don't know how it's going to translate over the speakers on the camera. But I can tap on the bottom of this and know how thick that is, because if it's a sharp kind of a snap noise, I know it's pretty thick. If it's more of a dull thud, that's not a good example. Man, I'm not, here, I'll show you once I'm done trimming this. Okay, but there's a difference in sound, and the deeper that sound is, the thinner this is gonna be. So just pay attention, be careful. And I'm gonna make a few more passes here. Something else my students get into the habit of doing is they'll push into it and they kind of let their wrist turn this way. And this is not what to do, okay? Keep your wrist straight. Draw yourself a straight line from the center all the way over. If this were a clock and 12 o'clock was here, 6 o'clock, 3 o'clock, you want to go to the center and draw a straight line from the center of the clock to 3 o'clock. Okay, and it's really important to hold on tight to the tool so it doesn't rip it out of your hands while you're doing this. Okay, sweep all this stuff out of the way. I'm going to do another pass here. And the number of passes kind of depends on your pressure and how thick your base is. There we go. So I'm going to do that tap test again. Oh, there we go. So a little more of a dull thud, so I know I'm getting right to the sweet spot. Okay, last couple things that I do for my bowls is I'm going to push my tool here into the corner, right up against my safety wall, a little extra pressure there. Okay, and then I'm going to go back the other direction towards the center just a little bit to kind of round this foot out, or round this base out. Okay, and the reason I do that, this is something I learned in college. What it does is it helps get rid of some of the clay that's stuck kind of between these 2 points. That's a pretty common thick place. So I'm making it to where if I cut this in half, there's an even curve that goes from the edge of the bowl all the way around the foot. So the foot really ends up just kind of looking like it's been attached after the fact with this perfectly consistent base and wall. So that's the goal. Not always possible, but that's why I do this. Okay. Now I'm just getting rid of throwing lines here and trying to catch some of those little giblets, because those can throw off your whole groove here if you don't get them all off. Okay, and I'm going to get rid of the swirly here in a second, but first I'm going to flatten out the edge of my foot just by pressing vertically into it with my same trimming tool. Okay, I'm going to clean up the foot itself just by putting a little pressure on top. Make it nice and flat, and you can see when it's all kind of even because the color of the clay changes just a little bit just from the pressure. And then to get rid of that swirly, I'm going to go back in with my pear tool and just hold that flat so that it trims a larger place at a time. Okay, just be careful because that happens. Ah. Okay, so what happened here is that I wasn't paying attention, and the base of my pear tool brushed my foot, and I just took a huge chunk out of my foot right here. And there's really, I mean, you can't really add clay to that to fix it, because that's not going to bond like you want it to, especially on such a thin spot. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of some of that clay there, get that out of my way, and show you pretty much the only option for fixing this. I guess there's two options. One is to just cut the foot off, and we don't want to do that. Okay, so I'm going to go back in. I'm going to push vertically into the side of the wall. I'm actually kind of glad that happened so I could show you, because that is a possibility. Okay, and then I'm going to push kind of diagonally just above my wall barrier. And I just created a new angle on the inside of this foot, which is not what I originally wanted. But sometimes you just gotta be creative with the lemons that you created by not paying attention. So when you hand yourself lemons, make bowl trimming lemonade. You know what I mean. Okay. So I'm just trying to get rid of these trimmings, these little giblets here, because when I do my final step, I want those to be gone. Try to get them out of the way. Sometimes they stick, and if your clay is wet at all, they usually stick in this point. Okay, final step here, I'm gonna take my red rib, I'm going to push it, so with the end of it, the skinny end of it, push it with my middle finger into my base. And I'm going to drag it from the center all the way over to that barrier, that safety wall that I made, and then back again. Okay, and that just gives you a nice, flat, smooth inside of the base here. Okay, push on the foot and all of its angles, even if they were accidental, on my decorative wall and just below it. We're just getting rid of any throwing marks or trimming marks that we didn't want to be there. Okay. Sometimes swirlies don't go away by themselves. Go. Okay, that's a foot. I'm going to pull my clay off the sides. Okay, sometimes that makes your clay a little too dry to use, so you can put this into a recycling bin. Okay, it's not bad. That would probably be okay to trim another bowl with. So I'll throw that back in my bucket. Okay, and then turn it over. Now I do have a goober right here. This is from the clay that I stuck to the side. I don't want that there. So I'm going to use my loop tool and gently shave that off. Okay. Oh, sorry. Bumped the camera. My bad. And then I'm going to use my red rib and just smooth over it. It's a bowl with a foot. Okay, this black stuff here, that's just from the wheel head. Don't worry about that. That'll come out. Okay, you can always go back in and use your red rib to smooth out any imperfections there. You could also use a finishing sponge, again from Mud Tools. Okay, this is called the finishing sponge. It looks like a chunk of clay really right now, but when you get this wet, it turns into this floppy, super smooth sponge that is great for smoothing things out. And otherwise, that's all there is to it. So that's how we trim. Hopefully you learned something new, or maybe just reaffirmed the way that you already trim, or maybe you've never trimmed before and you're super nervous to do it, which I understand. It's a crazy process, and it takes a lot of practice, a lot of patience, and it's probably going to take a lot of messed up projects for you to really learn the ins and outs of this process. But one thing I will say, and I say this to my students too, if you want to get really good at trimming really fast, throw yourself 6 little bowls would be good, of all as close to the same size as possible, and then trim them one after the other, right in a row. That way you can perfect issues from the last one and get better on the next one, and then get better on the next one. You know what I mean? So give it a shot. Hopefully it works out great for you. Check us out on, and by us, I mean me, on Instagram at Mr. Teapots. Is that backwards to you? I don't know if that's backwards to you, but it's at Mr. Teapots on Instagram. And please check out Rocky Mountain Clay. Use hashtag Rocky Mountain Clay in your posts on Instagram, and go to RockyMountainClay.com to get yourself some clay and try it out. And I think that's all we got. We'll see you next time.